Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition, greeting you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the United States of America. On this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, a turbulent world politically, economically. As in the United States, you are looking at raising interest rates once again to fight rampant inflation. Rising gas prices, the war in Ukraine, it seems like a very unstable world. And we're closing out what's been a very, very turbulent year all across the US, all across the world. Today, we welcome you to the show. And I want to begin my monologue before we go over some events that are taking place around the world. On December 12th, 2014, at Sandy Hook Elementary School, a gunman walked into a school and shot down elementary school children who were innocently going to school, just did not get to see another day. How many were in the shooting? I think it was about 6 or 7 elementary school children, 20 first graders, and 6 adults. Since that time, which was a tragic day in America, there have been 3,500 mass shootings in our country. Many, many students now going to school afraid of a gunman coming in and doing terrible things. Since that time, we've had other school shootings, other incidents. In Raleigh, a gunman shooting innocent bystanders on a greenway. We've had shootings in theaters, in churches, in places of worship. I've lost count, so I can't remember them all today for this monologue. During this time, we've had some efforts at the federal level on gun reform legislation submitted by President Biden that Senator Tillis and others worked on, which was progress. But still today, we are challenged to understand, why is this happening? So today we should talk about that. What is it going to take to prevent this violence? And this is not by any stretch of the means a attack on those lawful gun owners who have their Second Amendment rights. But it's about, why are guns getting in the hands of the wrong people, and what can we do about it? Now, there are technologies like ShotSpot and gun detection technologies that even cities like Durham and North Carolina are looking that leverage artificial intelligence and data so that they can actually get and respond to these crimes sooner, before it is too late, in a matter of seconds. Now, the other thing I'll say, and I'm going to end my monologue with this before we get into some other things going on in the world, is that the gun violence that we see happens in a country that only has 4% of the world's population, United States of America, but 50% of the guns. As Fareed Zakaria has said on his show, in the United States, you're 50 times more likely to die of a gun homicide than Britain, 150 times more than Germany, and 250 times more than Japan. Now, I agree with Fareed. I don't think it's that we have 250 times more people out there. I think that we have too many guns getting out there, but they're getting out there in the hands of the wrong people. And that's a concern. We would have thought by now that our country would have been able to do something to end the senseless violence that continues to occur. Quite frankly, I'm getting tired of saying my hearts and prayers go out to the families of the victims and the cities and all the places where it happens, when it continues to happen time and time again. So on this show, we will talk about that today, along with other issues. The Fed raising interest rates, the cryptocurrency crisis with FTX, the Texas Attorney General requesting data of lists of people on their gender records. Why this matters is it does, could restrict rights of citizens in Texas, but it's an interesting story. And then there are storms coming in the central part of the country. And Argentina advances to the World Cup final. Today, we look forward to seeing Morocco, first Arab and African country to make the semifinals. And we talked about Africa yesterday before I bring on Mark Lee and the guests, and there is a summit going on today in the White House on U.S.-Africa relationships and trade, and that's going to be an interesting topic. So we're hoping to bring some speakers on next week about that. And we have a special guest tomorrow joining us, Guri Burmi, a Morrisville resident who came back from his California 6,200-mile motorbike ride to raise money for juvenile diabetes. I was there to welcome him home yesterday. It was a great moment. But let's bring on the guest, Mark. Thank you so much for being with us today, everybody, and let's get started.
Glad to bring on the folks. We've got some amazing people, including some folks with some interesting statistics and all of that, because I know that Chris is usually...
Now, gentlemen, I know this is a controversial issue, so I'll say from the time, my intent as a moderator today, and I tried to be very... I really want this to be a working session of what we can do to address this issue. And as I said, and I will repeat, I'm not going to go on a Democratic tirade against the Republicans and say, you guys aren't doing this and this, because I do defend many lawful gun owners and many are my friends, that we're not saying that they can't have guns. But there seems to be a problem. Why is this not happening in other countries?
First of all, let me just say right now, we have to ask the question, a critical question, critical thinking. Let's all critical think at this time. Is this a problem? Now we sit back and we go, my God, there's so many shootings. My God, this is senseless violence. First of all, where's there sensible violence? I'd like to know where there's sensible violence. Just tell me that. So that's number one. Number two is I have on my shared screen the CDC current data on the causes of death in the United States. Now I want you to take a look at this. This is from 1999 to 2020. You tell me here where you see shootings. I don't see shootings, unintentional injuries. This is, you know where the homicide, this is scary. The third ranking cause of death, ages 1 to 4. Ages 1 to 4 is homicide. That's number 3. I mean, that means the kids are being killed. This is a real, I mean, look at this. This is from 1999, 2020, we've lost, 8,000 kids for homicide? That's ridiculous. I don't see anywhere in here. I'm looking. I don't see anywhere in here about, and I see homicide, and homicide could be by gun. Okay, so you could say that. Okay, homicide, 25 to 34, 104,000 killed by homicide. So suicide, there's more suicides between 15 and 24 and 105,000 than there is homicide. Look, let's ask the question, is this a problem or is this a media-generated problem? Is this something that needs to be done by the curtailment of guns, or is it the need that, hey, look, what is it that we are having a problem with? Now Gavin Newsom, in his honest to God, I'm going to be presidential, has stated that nobody can buy a gun until they're 21 years old in the state of California. And I'm sitting back going, that's just great, Gavin. So next thing is I'd make a lawsuit and I'd say, look, you can't, then that means I can't vote till I'm 21. That means I can't do anything till I'm 21. This is a slippery slope here. When do we consider a person an adult? At the age of 18 or at the age of 21? And I don't give a crap. I'm over 60. So this is what I'm talking about. This is kind of
so you able to break down domestic violence versus not?
No, I was going to say
the homicide numbers on children.
But
that's where I was going to go and everything, because I actually talked about this last week. As y'all will recall, there was a potential mayor of Denver that was over at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, and gun violence is one of the issues that he deals with and everything. And he actually made a comparison between the
There
city
it
of
is,
Durham,
Lee.
a city that I love dearly, and the city of Watts, or the area of Watts, because he actually said that in some places Durham is worse than Watts. And I can't really argue with him on that, because one of the issues that exist is that there is a lot of gangs and gang violence throughout the country, more than we probably want to admit and everything. And Shaquille, you'll be glad to know that in this particular case, it was actually a group of African-American males that got together. I want to say it was last year and everything. It might have been earlier this year. And they were actually on the steps of the center because they were realizing that there is a lot of black on black violence and black on black crime that takes place as well. And so they wanted to do something to address that issue and let folks know that there were strong role models within the community that recognized the problem and wanted to tackle the issue. And even the current mayor of Durham has made this an issue that she talks about as well, because we can't say that guns aren't an issue when there are a lot of folks that have too easy and access to the guns and all in that space. And I mean, there have been numerous cases of drive-by shootings, both here in Durham and other places. And a lot of times the victims have nothing to do with what the violence is. It's just random shootings and random things along that space. So there are a number of times that the guns are out there and they're out there in the wrong hands. And there you are right when you're talking about that system that they're trying to put into place to detect some of those guns. And we even have resource officers in some of the schools that try to keep track of them as well. So I do know that the gun violence issue is an issue that impacts a number of communities, and those communities are trying to work on dealing with it. To one of Lee's favorite conversations, personal responsibility, there are a lot of people that are trying to tackle the issue and bring up the reasoning for there being guns there. There are some folks, and this may be where I get into a little bit of trouble and everything, that wonder how there is how people get access to those guns and everything, because there's got to be gun manufacturers. And are they, like some people have said they did with drugs, are they intentionally dropping them into certain communities and certain things along those lines? But definitely gun violence is a real issue that has to be addressed, and all that space.
Mark, in all due respect, when we're speaking about gun violence, can we couch the conversation all violence, and gun violence is a portion of that? And then we speak about gun violence. I think Chris, if you can click on the link, we'll see.
I did. It's on my share screen. So
I'm actually bringing it across for folks that want to watch and everything. Oh,
yeah.
The vast majority of these homicides, whatever, the violence is with handguns, not with long guns. Overwhelming. But that's not what we want to address, because that's not what's pretty out there.
I don't want to spend the whole show on this, but I do think that to me, it is a problem when you send your children to school and you wake up the next day and they're gone.
100%. There's no argument with anyone on that.
We agree.
But is it technology might be a way we're going to solve it. There are these ShotSpotter and AI detection systems. I don't know. They're looking at it in Durham. I missed.
No, I'll tell you something, Steve. I really do appreciate that, and I do appreciate the technologists making money off of this, because that's exactly what they're doing. But let me tell you something. I'm a criminal. If I'm a criminal, I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to get a gun, because I know how to get a gun. That's number one. I'm a criminal. I don't give a crap about legal stuff. I'm going to get a gun by whatever means I need to. Second of all, I'm smart enough, and there are some criminals that are smart enough, they're going to beat that ShotSpotter. And I'll tell you how I would beat it. I would have somebody on the other side of the freaking block putting off, there it is. I got my ShotSpotter. Okay, 9/11. We're gonna put people on that rock. Boom, 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 boom. You know, they're gonna triangulate that and whatever else. In the meantime, I'm doing a robbery all the way on the other side without a gun. You know, I mean, this ShotSpotter, I'll tell you what this is. This is laziness, folks. This is laziness. Instead of putting cops on the beat, instead of doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, we're getting lazy. We're lazy in our technology. Let me ask you a question. Anybody on the panel, how do you control your thermostats? Do you control it through your phone? Do you control your thermostats through your phone? What do you control through your phone? Do you control your garage door opener? Do you control all that stuff? You know what that's called? Laziness. It's called laziness. And I'll tell you what happens. As convenience increases, so does the vulnerability of our entire society. And I've been harping on this as a cybersecurity guy forever. These ShotSpotter things are bullcrap. And they've tried it. Let me tell you a story. And this is a true story. In Vietnam, what they tried to do is, what they tried to do in Vietnam was they decided that they were going to literally sniff out the Viet Cong. So they had these sensors that they bought from this big technology company that would sniff out Viet Cong because it was programmed for a specific type of sense, right? And they dropped these all over the jungle. And they said, "Oh man, we're gonna catch these Viet Cong." You know what the Viet Cong did? They crapped in a bucket and they put the bucket right next to the sensor. It drove the sensor crazy and nothing ever happened and they had to get rid of it. You know what they developed? The F-111, the greatest fighter ever. And they said this thing can go 500 nap of the earth, NOE, nap of the earth flying, and it can bomb whatever and do whatever. You know what they did? They got weather balloons and wire, and they put weather balloons up with wire, and when they were doing nap of the earth flying, they would hear them coming, and they would put this weather balloon up and it would slice the aircraft in half. So they had to go up higher and they would be vulnerable to SAMs. Steve, I really appreciate the fact that everybody believes the technology somehow is going to save us. It's not going to save us. And Mark, you got to agree with this. It has to do with we're taking the onus off of the community and we're putting it on technology. It's the community's responsibility, the community, not just the cops, the community, to sit back and police themselves as well as helping the police do whatever they need to do.
You've been quiet.
Chris, would you grow up? When guns more available than they are now, why didn't we bring them into schools? I think it's a culture.
Shaquille, happy birthday, by the way. We're going to Shaquille answer. Come back to you, Lee. Shaquille, any thoughts? And then Dan, before we go back to Lee.
Thank you for the happy birthday. Look, I obviously am lucky enough to have grown up in a country where guns have not really been a thing because we don't have any rights, apparently, so the government can do what they like, and they took all of our guns away from us. So there was actually a gun range at my school, one of the schools I went to, and I remember shooting guns in prep school in year 5 and 6. Then we had a mass murder. And it still remains today one of the mass murders with the highest amount of casualties in history. So, well, not in history, in modern history, I should say. So there have been some that have been close to it, and a couple that have now exceeded that death rate. But that was pretty serious, and that's what actually led to the national gun ban here in Australia. Unfortunately, we are now seeing gun violence increase, and just in the last week, there was a situation where I don't know the whole story, but it sounds like there was somebody who was having some mental health issues on a rural farm. Some very young police officers straight out of the academy went to the farm to just do a welfare check. He wasn't in any trouble. They were just trying to make sure that he was okay. And those officers were actually shot and killed, as well as 3 people inside the house. So, look, we still have the issues. Now, obviously, we're a smaller country, so we don't have the issues as frequently as you do in America. But when I hear the arguments in the United States, I think that the arguments make very little sense. A lot of the gun control arguments that are put forth by Democrats generally, Steve, but there are some others as well that put forth these arguments. They'll say things like, let's have red flag laws, which seems to make sense, except that's only going to work if you're keeping a tally of who's got the guns and you're actually doing these checks. Same thing with universal background checks. But clearly the people that are most likely to commit these offences and the criminals are not going to subject themselves to those checks. They're going to find another way around it. And when that's brought up, there isn't really anything offered as to how to deal with that solution. So I think that for very divided politics in America on almost every issue, they really have to start thinking about the language that they're using. So when one political party says, well, we try to enact common sense gun laws and the other side don't support common sense laws, well, what's common sense about them? You need to be able to actually have a proper conversation about the issues. Clearly, it's an issue in America. I think Chris is probably right about technology not necessarily being the solution. I'm not sure how I'd feel if I had children go to schools in America. I think I'd prefer to see the teachers or faculty have access to weapons so that they can use them without having to rely on police services. But of course, that introduces a whole different threat. What happens if a teacher, goes off the rails and starts shooting the kids? What do you do? So I think that you have to just examine things, and you have to accept that there is a certain measure of risk that you have when you live in a free society. And you know, there has to be a balance between individual rights and freedom and liberty. And you know, the other side of any argument where they say, look, I don't want my freedom to be taken away from me, they're not your enemy. There might be a middle ground. I don't know what it is, but I think that there needs to be a healthy conversation about it.
Speaking of healthy conversation and all along those lines, I definitely want to hear what Dan and
Lee had a point
as well.
Yeah,
but I was actually going to bring up
real quickly. Steve, you brought up something: mass shootings, what have you, school shootings. We just had this horrific killing out in the United States college campus. It wasn't by guns; it was by knives. Knives are 4 or 5 times more likely to kill people than long guns. The FBI statistics that Chris put up before. You're not going to ban knives. And most of the gun violence, overwhelming, is handguns. You're not touching handguns. So what are you doing other than a photo op?
But
this is not the problem. It's culture.
If you think that those types of solutions are going to work, you can't just compare them to nothing, right? You can't just sit there in the United States in a vacuum and then just like make stuff up and think, oh, well, that sounds good, we'll do it. Compare it to other countries. So in Australia, for example, most states and territories, if you are carrying a knife, you have to prove that you have a lawful reason for carrying that knife. If you don't, you can be charged with having a weapon. But has that decreased knife crimes in Australia? As far as I can tell from Australian statistics, no, it hasn't. Now, you have a similar rule in the UK, but knife crime, especially in London, is out of control.
But the countries that have gun control laws have less gun homicides.
Have got these gangs
that laws. That's
sure. So some of these gangs in the north parts of England and some of the bigger cities, they're using knives to inflict very, very serious injuries that can subsequently lead to death or permanent disablement. Where in the United States they may have actually shot and killed the person. So let me just say these two things. Sorry, now I'll just say these two things. If you're going to look at school shootings, why is it not ever talked about that there is a significant number, there's a significantly higher number of public school kids, they're generally boys, public school boys that are resorting to using weapons and shooting other students? You're not seeing that so much in charter schools. You're not seeing that much in private schools. Is there a lack of funding for mental health, or a lack of access to school counsellors, etc.? I don't ever hear that conversation being talked about. And in relation to race-related stuff, Mark, I think you'll find that there are obviously white gangs out there. White gangs tend to injure people that are, that look like them. There is also black on black violence, and there is a significant.
I said that at the beginning of mine. I said that black on black.
But that needs to be talked about, discussed.
And I did bring that up, and I said,
Dan Worthington, we can't hear you, Dan.
Oh, you can't hear me. How about?
No. Now we've lost you all together. We were able to hear you before, but it was soft. Now we've lost you all together. You're actually muted, Dan.
You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Dan.
God doesn't want to hear the conservative voice today.
All right, listen.
Yeah.
Gun violence is really a difficult issue. Guns don't kill people. People do. Mentally ill people kill mostly. The school shootings are normally mentally ill people. So what are the solutions? I think interdiction, number one. Like Lee said, we should have a police presence, better security in our schools. We should enforce the gun laws that we do have. I think that's important. And we should also make sure that the mental health needs of our students is being met so that we can spot issues before they become critical. You're right. There isn't anything happening with handguns. Handguns are the major culprit. The AK-47s and other things are a minor portion of the problem. But they are a part of the problem. So there has to be common sense solutions. The problem is that both parties use this as a political fundraising tool, And instead of solving the problems, they're doing like they do everything else: play political football, power politics, and raise money. On that, I need to go. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you,
Dan,
Dan.
take care. Have a good day. God bless.
Have a good day.
Bye. God bless.
So let me say
Happy
on the end-
birthday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me say on the end of what Dan has said there, and just going back to what I was talking about, it seems so interesting to me that when it comes to abortion, people are happy to start talking about other countries until it turns out that abortion around the world is actually less restrictive than what was allowable under Roe v. Wade. When it suits them, they'll talk about socialism, and they'll talk about Sweden and Denmark, to the point that the prime ministers of those countries have to come to the United States and sit down the meeting and say, we are not socialists, we're a free market economy. So, you're pretty happy to do that when it suits your purposes, not happy to do it when it doesn't. If you really believe that simply outlawing guns or making them much harder to get is a solution to the gun crisis in the United States, why is it not working in Mexico?
Wait. Okay, come on, time out. It does work, Shaquille. And
It works in Mexico, does it?
I will show you where it works. I will show you the solution. It's really simple. In the United States of America, we have 19,600 airports. In these 19,600 airports, there's nearly zero gun shootings and zero knife killings. Isn't it amazing? It does work. So all you do is you adopt a system that works
Nick,
throughout the United
airports are locked down, secure facilities. I don't think you want United States streets to be locked down, secure facilities.
Well, no, that's exactly what Nick.
Do you want
That's
to
exactly
solve
what
the
Nick
problem?
would
Do you want
like.
to solve the problem, or do you want to talk about the problem?
You want to copy every door when people come out of their house?
We have in our
This is
courtroom
exactly-
where I practice law.
Those are locked down facilities, courtrooms.
Every courtroom I've gone to in the last 38 years is secured. Why are all the courtrooms secured?
You're going to secure every block and every street and every school and park.
Exactly,
Yeah, that's
exactly. And
exactly
I'll
the
tell
kind
you,
of-
even though you think
That's
that's
exactly the kind of
crazy,
government that
years
Nick,
ago,
that Nick wants
they
to have.
thought
Nick wants to
securing
have.
airports were crazy. They really did. They were going,
Nick's
you're not going to
that-
secure every airport in America, are you? Yeah, all 19,600 of them. How many gun crimes? Zero. How many knife crimes? Zero.
Hey,
So if
Nick,
you want a
Nick,
secured community,
Nick, I
go
do
live
have
in
a
a community
question.
that's secure.
Nick,
So,
and
so
do
this
you feel- I
is,
do have a
hang on,
question.
hang on, Mark, hang on. So this is the kind of world that Nick would like to have. He
It
thinks
already
that
exists.
total domination over our lives by government is the solution.
Oh, let me bring the violin out. Poor Shaquille,
For liberty,
you can't have his
for-
bloody AR-57
for this
and run around
overreaching
killing
government
his free.
because he actually put trust
Come on.
in these politicians. But let me
Poor
just say,
Shaquille.
does anyone notice how he
Solve
didn't
the
address what
problem.
I actually asked? I brought up a question about Mexico. If gun laws work so well, why doesn't America compare itself to a neighboring country like Mexico and tell us whether gun laws are working very well in Mexico? And what did Nick do? He changed the subject to airport. So Nick,
Hey,
let's
listen,
do it.
Shaquille, it
Let's
does
do
it.
it.
We're trying to
They
bring
have
up some of the
one
stuff
gun
around
store.
Mexico. This is actually
They
from a
have one
few years
gun
back,
store.
but you will actually
You can
notice
jump
that
up and
gun
all down
violence
you want
is
to.
a problem around the world, and actually the United States is lower.
Yeah.
You can only buy
I
one.
don't know what you're complaining about. Okay,
Let's
if
talk about-
if your school's getting shot, that's because you didn't secure the area. If your neighborhood's getting shot, why do you think I lived in secured neighborhoods for like most of my life? In other words, they had security guards, we had gates, and Zippo crime. Hello? And let me tell you something, whether you like it or not, that's the America of the future. Either
Well,
that,
yeah.
they're gonna
I don't
So,
know-
um,
I don't know
You know,
what-
Mark, I appreciate that data. Let me throw up, Mark, if you would throw up my share screen just for a second here, if you would. All right, so let's go back to the United States just for a second. Go ahead, Shaquille, finish your
You
thought.
want to defund the police, right? Who's going to enforce all these
It has
rules that you
nothing
have?
to do with
So,
defund the
so
police.
absolutely, very wealthy
Okay.
people in very
No,
wealthy
you're-
areas don't have to
you're
deal with that.
talking
But
Australian
you can't
nonsense.
even keep fentanyl out, which is killing
So-
people dropping to the point that
No.
life expectancy rates. in some
So
parts of America-
getting back to what Steve was talking about. So this is gun ownership versus gun deaths, and so you can see that now they did what they call a single. They call it here a straight line correlation here. This is not the right type of line to use with this. No, in other words, if you have the gun ownership, in the gun deaths increase with gun ownership. Now
Chris, I'm sorry,
there are
Chris,
some.
I'm sorry. I'm
Yep.
sorry. I apologize. I really do.
Yep. Go ahead.
Gun deaths, obviously, those numbers can be tracked. How do you know
That-
gun ownership when most people are getting them illegally?
Yeah, I mean, the gun ownership, again, this is data, right, Lee? So the data it doesn't necessarily mean that the gun is valid. It means it's verified. So basically what happens is
How
the
do you know
gun
if I'm on the street
ownership,
with an illegal gun? It's not
Right.
in there. It's not ownership.
but the gun ownership is all legal, right? So in other words, the only way that they can determine gun ownership is by
legal.
registration. That's right.
Right.
So it's
That's why
registered.
illegal gun ownership is not reflected there.
But the thing I wanted to point out was this,
Thank
is Delaware has less than 10% gun ownership. It is, look where it is in the relationship of gun deaths. In other words, you have less guns, less gun ownership in that state. You have more gun deaths than Rhode Island. You have, in Hawaii, you have 45% that own guns, and yet you have less than 5 per 1,000 residents being killed by guns. There's something that we need to take a look at. Why is it that they can have 45% of their citizens owning guns, but yet they are the lowest of all the states from the standpoint of gun deaths? Things like Alaska. Now, Alaska, they have 60% of the gun ownership, 65%, and they're one of the highest, if not the highest, gun deaths. So I agree with you, Steve. But basically, what happens is what we need to do is figure out what's happening in Hawaii. That they can do this. What's happening even in North Dakota, where you have 50%, but yet it's down below this what they call the average line here. And then you got things like Ohio, where you have 25%, and yet you're above the line. Maine, Pennsylvania, all these areas. So that's what we need to do. Take a look at that.
Why have an inner city problem?
Airports and courtrooms, please, Counselor. The gun
As
deaths
next- as
in
next step,
airport,
I think
which millions of
before we go to
people
the
are
next
on.
issue, I'm going
Do
to
you want to get rid of the Second Amendment?
in the next
Zero.
couple
Do
months.
you want to get rid of the Second Amendment completely? No more.
Oh, yeah, I would
No
get rid of
more.
the Second
Hold on a
Amendment.
second.
I would have got rid of the Second Amendment years ago. It's way
Yeah, you said
outdated.
that
Just get
definitely
rid of
Nick,
it.
a couple of times. A couple of
Yeah,
things.
but
One, I want
you're
to.
having to
It's
throw.
something that the
I don't
conservative
say you're-
worship
you're
because they
having-
think it came from God.
You're having to throw
Giving
out all
guns
the
to people to
amendments.
kill
You've
people
said
didn't
that
come from
previously.
God. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
And
Steve.
how about knives?
You've
Hey,
said previously
knives
you're
also,
having to
Nick?
throw out all the amendments.
I'd
But
get rid of the Second
when you're
Amendment,
asked,
Goodbye.
but when you're asked
Steve.
what you'd replace them
I
with,
don't worship the Constitution
Sorry,
like
Steve.
a lot of people.
Nick,
Steve had a point here.
You've expressed
Well, I'm
many
trying
times
to
before
moderate
that
the
you're
show,
happy to
so
get rid
Okay,
of
okay.
other
What, I
amendments.
think one next
But
step
when
is
I ask
bring-
you what you'd like to replace them with, the only thing that you want to come up with is the most authoritarian type of government. You don't come up with any suggestions that would actually be good compromises. All you come up with is let government take care of everything. Increase police services.
What about Shaquille?
There's no corruption. Or
Nick, do you want to get rid of the Second Amendment? Does that apply to the government also and politicians? Can politicians, could they have the guns?
Hey, Lee and
That's what I'm
security?
saying,
Lee,
Nick.
hold on a
That's
second.
not when
Hold on a
they
second.
enter the halls of Congress.
Hey, Lee
That's
and
not gonna be a
Shaquille.
solution.
Lee and Shaquille, and I actually got a question for you before we get out of here and everything, Shaquille. And then I'm gonna pivot it back to Steve because I know he's got some other issues he wants to get to. But one thing I was going to ask is, we're talking about politicians how they do things, and apparently the Oregon governor, who by the way is a Democrat, has decided that one of the ways to get in the good graces of the people as she's heading out the office, because she's already heading out the door, is to commute the death sentence of the 17 inmates that had been awaiting execution there. And she was saying that with less than a month in office, that she's going to use her executive clemency power to commute the sentences, and that her orders would take effect on today. And her quote was, "I've long believed that justice is not advanced by taking a life, and the state should not be in the business of executing people, even if a terrible crime placed them in prison." So she's actually saying that she's just going to have them commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So I guess it'll just be there until the end. But what are folks' thoughts? Because that's another issue that a lot of folks have been trying to deal with around the world, is this whole notion of death penalty moratoriums. And apparently Oregon hasn't executed a prisoner since 1997. So they've been sitting there for a while.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's real simple. The state shouldn't execute people. Just stick them in a cell and forget about them. I mean,
I happen to agree with Nick on this one. I'm very consistent. I'm very pro-life, and it comes to across the
I'm
board.
pro-life, but
And so I don't
I'm
differentiate
also-
over here either.
I'm also pro 10th Amendment, so we get rid of the second and let the states relegate how they're going to take care of guns. So if they want to secure their borders, let them secure their borders. And let's say they say there's no guns in the state of
But
California.
Nick, by the
They
same
secure
by
and
the
no
same
knives.
token,
It's
hold
federal
on a
rights,
second.
though.
Nick, by the same token, are we going to do that by state rights with the whole issue around death penalty, because so far 70 people have been executed this year, all by lethal
but
injection, and all in Texas,
I'm not
Oklahoma,
pro-death
Arizona,
penalty.
Missouri, and
Mark.
Alabama. I think all 5 of those states are relatively
Mark,
red states. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
we send the wrong
But I'm
message.
wondering, are we going to let the states decide?
No,
Well,
no.
hang on, but it is
The
a state.
state shouldn't
Son of
involve
Mark,
the death
Mark,
penalty.
it's-
You're sending the wrong message. If you,
You've
if
had a
you've
had a hiatus on the federal death penalty for quite a long time now. These are
Right.
state charges, otherwise the governor wouldn't be able to commute them. But look, personally, and again, I live and work in countries that don't have the death penalty, especially around Europe. However, I think that for some crimes, not all crimes, not even all premeditated murders, but for some crimes, the offence is so egregious that to ask a taxpayer to continually pay to keep people alive, while the victims' families who have been devastated, they don't get that money, they don't get that sort of financial support. I think that there is an inherent unfairness in that. And when PragerU talks about this, they bring up a terrible case in Connecticut where, an 11-year-old and 17-year-old girl were violently attacked. They were tied to their beds and set on fire while their incapacitated father heard his daughters screaming to death. And these two killers also killed the mother. Now, he actually wanted them to be put to death. They were sentenced to death. And what's happened since then is that they've both been turned into life sentences. And one of them has now decided that he's a trans person. And because trans is a human right, the taxpayers of Connecticut are actually
yes, that's
trans
a great segue.
So,
into the next issue.
let me finish. So, if you're going to talk about these issues, talk about them properly. Should Saddam Hussein have been hung? If America is able to get their hands on Vladimir Putin, what are you going to do? Put him at Camp Cupcake for a while?
No.
I mean, some crimes.
If he's a political prisoner, we've done that a couple of times. Isn't that what we did with Noriega? Wasn't he sitting there in a cupcake for a while?
Yeah. So that's it. Well, we're going to come back on this issue, and we're going to bring in some U.S. congressmen from federal and Democrat, and then also the state officials as well, because I think it's important to see what kinds of efforts can be made, whether it's mental illness, stronger security measures. Maybe it's a hybrid approach of dealing with this issue, but we'll come back to that in the next few weeks. Sakil gave a good segue into the next issue. Republican Attorney General saying he wants data on gender, and is that a violation of human rights or gender rights, or is he just, a little bit of a weird request, but he is requesting it, and the LGBT community up in arms about it, but that's an issue.
Why? Well, Steve, yeah, isn't that strange? Well, why would somebody look? As far as I know, from the current data, there's about 10% of the population, 10% to do what Nick does. 10% of the population says that they're LGBTQ. 10%. Okay, so the thing is that again, gender is gender is gender. By asking what gender you are, how can people in the least bit be excited about that in a bad way? If you're sitting back and you're telling me I'm non-binary. This is how everybody gets away with this. I'm non-binary. What does that mean? What does that mean, non-binary? I recently did a survey, and this is interesting now. I recently did a survey that I had to do for a book that I'm working on. And so I went out to 226 people, sampling of 226 people, random sampling. In that random sampling, I got less than 4% said they were neither male nor female. What happened is the minute we got rid of sex and put in gender, we destroyed this country. We should just say, what's your sex? And people sit there and say, well, I'm non-binary. No, bullcrap. You're the male or female. What are you? Sex. FM. Not or not close. It's bullcrap.
But all they're going to do is just change the language again, right? Well, why exactly is saying to cabin crew, because you can't even call them flight attendants anymore, right? Before flight attendants was around, they were stewards and stewardesses. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you can't call them that. Oh, no. Like, we've taken away. That's what I always say to Mark. This left-wing political correctness bullshit has taken away the magic and the love that there is in life, and the fact that there are common differences between us. Okay, and we're supposed to act like we're all exactly the same, but yet some of us are different. Like some of us have got skin color, so therefore we've been oppressed our whole lives, but we're also exactly the same, and skin color doesn't matter. Females should be treated exactly the same, paid exactly the same. There's no differences between us, but they are also an oppressed class of people that need special treatment. It just never stops. And there's
no, but I mean, Shaquille, hold on a second. Shaquille, I've got some friends that
we're not doing it. We're not playing these games.
No, Shaquille, but I've got some friends that are part of that community. Actually, one of them that used to be on the show and even do shows with us regularly, and I won't name their name because I don't know if they want me to and everything, but they actually like that term because they like to have the acceptance.
What term, Mark? What term?
Male and their female aspects of their life and everything. So they want to be addressed as non-binary, then I'm not going to have any problem with them being addressed in that way and everything. Because like I said, I think it is perfectly fair.
Call them by their name.
Realize that most people have those things that are going on in society.
Mark, you've missed the point. It doesn't matter whether you have a problem addressing that person that way. It matters whether I do. If I don't want to address that person that way, then don't force me to.
If they take that as an insult, and they have taken it as an insult, because I've seen in rooms in places where they take that as a egregious insult if you do not identify them the way that they want to be identified.
Get over it.
They have taken that very much of an insult, and they have definitely gone on people and everything. Like I said,
we now have a situation where people are insulted and offended when they're in hospitals if somebody misgenders them. You've got biological males that are going in to clinics as teenagers saying, I was never asked if I wanted a pap smear, despite the fact that I don't actually have the anatomy for one. But because I wasn't asked, they assumed my gender and I'm offended. Now, look, if you know that you have taken hormones or you've done whatever to look like the gender that you're biologically not, it shouldn't be up to the medical personnel at the hospital to try to cater to your woke fantasies. What happens if you're an older person, you've got some kind of ailment, you wear these bands on your arm or around your neck or whatever so they can read what medication you're on, they can read, that you've got a heart
allergies,
right? This is what you have. You inform them if you're going to be something which fits outside the norm. But these people, they're offended by everything, including their own reflection. And leave the rest of it out. The rest of us out of it. If you want to say, look, no problems, I'll call them they, them. You go for it. But if I don't want to, don't force me to.
And if they're going to be insulted by it, then they probably won't have any dealings with you. And that's all I'm saying. Is they've got the rights to have that opinion and the way that they're going to treat it. And if you're going to be like against the they, them movement or whatever they want to call it and everything, then they're probably not going to associate with you because they want to be respected in the ways that they want to be respected.
Fine.
And that's perfectly fine. And I have no problem with that. I'm just saying that I choose to respect them if that's the way they want to do it. But if you choose not to deal with them and everything, that's your opinion.
But what you don't want to do is you don't want to show any respect for the people who have genuine concerns about issues, whether it be race or something else, where they don't agree with you or they don't agree with your solutions. If I had somebody in my life who I respected, who wanted to be called by a different pronoun, I probably would. But if they want me, if people around want me to walk into every restaurant that I go to and say, oh, g'day, mate. Oh, hang on, I shouldn't say mate. So what was your pronoun? I don't even know your name, and I don't care.
Like I said, I don't think anybody's asking for that. I think that they're asking for the respect that you just said that you'd be willing to give, which is they want to be called they, them. You're going to call them they, them, and everything. And that's all most of the ones that I've seen want. They don't. I've never seen anybody say that they want to force anybody in a restaurant to call them other than the names that they. It's more about a personal thing.
We're putting this in the parking lot, and we're going to shift gears. And then here we go. Ukraine. Sasha, tell us about Ukraine. You like that metaphor, guys? Shift gear, stick shift.
It's no longer talk about Ukraine. It's talk about Russia. Let's
please. That's what I meant.
Let's be aware of that Ukraine will definitely not lose this war. And furthermore, it's now attacking the Russian-based strategic bombers, and it's done with or without consent of United States and NATO, and all they're saying is that, look, we didn't supply these missiles. We don't know what Ukrainians will decide to do or not to do. It's out of our hands. Deal with that the best you can. That's all there is to it. So now, by the way, all these drones, highly sophisticated drones, very powerful, they are being produced in Kharkiv. Ukraine is not buying them anywhere. Ukraine is producing itself, and now they're ready to start producing a lot of other weaponry. Now, finally, United States agreed to give Ukraine the Patriot missiles. So very soon, the Ukrainian sky will be completely closed for Russians. So Russia is, they dig themselves into a huge hole, because the doctrine before this war was that it's impossible to imagine a war between nuclear power and non-nuclear power, because obviously nuclear power will unleash all these nuclear weapons, and tactical and not only tactical, and that will be the end of the story in the next hour and a half. So this war is impossible. Now, Putin, excuse me my French, he all that big time, because now he himself proved that there is a huge country with the second most powerful army in the world, with a nuclear weapon, probably the largest arsenal in the world, and they cannot do anything. They're impotent. It's like you see a wonderful girl and you want to get close to her, but you can't, simply because they.
Yeah, but Sasha, we also had that result of nuclear, non-nuclear with the United States in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, the United States in Kuwait, the United States in Iraq, the United States engages all over the world.
Remind me, please.
And we never. The only time we blasted nuclear weapons are Japan.
Yes.
I do believe the Patriot missiles will be a game changer.
Has ever Afghanistan or Iraq or any other of those countries, Vietnam including, has they ever did a damage to U.S. airports, taken out U.S. strategic bombers? I don't recall that. It never happened.
Yeah. Well,
So that makes
the
it
thing is, the
completely
Patriot. You know, when the HIMARS came over, I realized that would be a game changer. The Patriot missiles, I'm shocked we didn't send them over sooner, are really a game changer, Sasha, because it really neutralizes the ability of Russia to attack Ukraine through the air. So I'm glad they're sending them over, but it should have been done a long time ago. It should have been done a year ago. Get the Patriot missiles up and running. And that's the only way you can thwart the bully, which is Russia. But I don't want to beat up on Steve. Your Indian friends are supporting Russia, and so are the Chinese, indirectly, because India did not stop trading with Russia. As a matter of fact, they increased their trade almost 137%, buying Russian oil and keeping the ruble stable. And China did the same thing. So, and of course, the United States, we don't call India and China to the carpet. We just go, okay. You supported Russia indirectly, and the media quiet about it because they want the Indian and the Chinese, I guess, viewership.
Nick, along those same lines, I just love to hear your thoughts. That's actually what I was trying to grab and pull. But there appears to be, and I'd love to hear Sasha's thoughts about this. You know, if you're about to lose a war, and apparently definitely Ukraine left and right seems to be in the war to not lose, so they're going to be there until the last person and everything. And so there is a Russian commander that has appeared to actually call for the use of nuclear weapons. So I wanted to know your thoughts. Is that something that's going to happen?
The war. Okay, this whole idea that Ukraine won the war is garbage. Ukraine lost the war, and so did Russia. People don't enter in wars and win. When you enter in a war, you lose. The only question is, how much did they lose? Ukraine lost this war, and so did Russia, because what they're left with is a bunch of rubble that somebody's going to have to pick up. And same with Russia. They lost a bunch of men. and tanks. So this whole idea that they're going to win a war is garbage. Everybody
But
loses
along those
wars.
same lines, there's the push that now they're going to.
Depends how
Don't give me this
define.
garbage. Ukraine won the war. They don't win jack.
No. It all depends what you define as a winning the war. Ukraine defined it
No one
in very
wins the war.
simple terms. No, Ukraine.
Much alone.
But they
That
won. They
all
won
they
to the
need
extent.
is
Much
to
alone.
get Russian armies out of Ukrainian
Yeah, they
territory.
won to the extent that
That's
they
the
prevented an invasion to be taken over completely, right?
Right.
So that from that perspective, it is a win, right? Because Russia was supposed to be the strong power. Now they're weakened politically. They can't win this. Now they've destroyed their economy. They've isolated themselves.
Well, they didn't destroy their economy. The ruble is still pretty strong. See here what happened.
Doesn't mean anything. It's
India
manipulated
and
currency.
China came and saved Russia's bacon.
Yeah, but Sasha,
But-
so is the
Yeah.
American.
and
So is the
the
American
world
currency. The
press
American
gives
currency
them
is
both a pass.
manipulated.
But what
the
can
euro
you
is
really
manipulated.
buy with
The Biden's
rubles?
incompetent.
Show me
Let's not talk
one
about Biden.
commodity or anything that you can buy with rubles. Shaquille,
Wait.
you know that?
You know, what you can buy with rubles.
There's
apparently you
there's
can
a
buy-
heap of, there's a heap of minerals that come out of there. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that Russia's economy is in good shape, but the unfortunate reality is that as soon as trade sanctions, if the war comes to an end, and politically things change in Russia, there's also talk of Vladimir Putin's health being beginning to fail. There's going to be a political change, whether that be today, 5 years, 10 years. There's going to be some political changes in Russia. If at any point Russia has its sanctions lifted and starts to have a more harmonious relationship with the West, their economy will boom very, very quickly because they do have a lot of mineral wealth, and of course they have oil. They have a lot of other things that are mined out of the ground. And of course they've got agriculture. So I think that their economy will bounce back pretty quickly. You're right that it's manipulated at the moment, but show me a currency that's not being manipulated heavily at the moment by central banks.
Shaquille, I think you have to pay attention not to those rare minerals and oils and everything what Russia has and the ruble. The main thing what Russia has is that for 3 generations, the old people around the world living in fear of thermonuclear destruction of all population of the world. 3 generations. You want to go another generation live in that fear? I don't want. I mean, I live
What if
long
I
enough, and
said to you
by
that
the way, I served in the Russian army, and I know their doctrine, of course. As a
Sasha, what did I say there? What did I say there that would imply that I want to live in a generation
I'll tell you what.
of nuclear war?
By emphasizing Russian wealth of mineral resources and oil or so on, and when the war will be over, their economy will bring to back to power and so on, you're implying that they will have means to produce even more arms. They will have more money to produce more missiles, more devices. And I, for example, unlike you, I don't want to see that. I want Russian economy to be destructed, go to the ground. Russia being separated in several smaller states, maybe 7, 8, or whatever it might be. So there will be no more of nuclear threats. Now, don't forget something else. Russia is initiating all conflicts around the world, such as Kosovo in former Yugoslavia, such as all upheavals in Africa, everywhere that they can get their hands on. So United States now started to appreciate that. So now they're making small steps in Venezuela to muscle Russians out of there. Russia is an enemy, very powerful enemy, not
Sasha,
of Ukraine, but
Sasha,
of
hang on,
all
let me
the world,
respond to you.
including the United States.
Let me respond to you, please. Let me respond to you. I get your point, but you're attributing to me something that I didn't say and that I haven't
You
tried to
implied
reply.
that. You didn't say that.
Can I reply to you, please?
Yeah, sure.
Because you often come at me very hard when I say what I think are fairly banal things. Nothing I said there was a promotion of Russia as it exists today. I've said on previous shows that I'm surprised a country as big as that would be able to stay as big as that, especially coming out of this situation. But historically, if you have a look at countries that have gone through turmoil, you look at Japan, you look at Germany, you look at some countries in Africa, you have seen the international community through the IMF, etc., come in, and they'll often use money as a way to get results like you need to give up certain weapons or you need to change this or that. So there is a good chance that when the situation in that region of the world settles down, that there will be significant growth. Now, you may not like that. I'm not saying that we're promoting that, but I'm just saying objectively that's what we tend to see in other countries where things like this have occurred.
To me, growth is very important, but it's a secondary to live for 3 generations and now the 4th generation with a threat of total annihilation by Russian nukes. This is by far more important than whatever growth you are talking about. Who needs growth if there will be no more world as we know it?
You may well be correct that that's morally the better option, but unfortunately we're not run by governments around the world that base their decisions on morals. They base their decisions on money and power.
Not necessarily. Not
Well,
anymore. If it would be just for money, Germany and France would continue to buy Russian oil and gas. They don't. They're going into.
But that's under significant.
To make their point.
That was under significant international pressure.
And who created that pressure? Who created that pressure? Who created the situation if it's not Russia? And Russia is not threatening just Ukraine. Ukraine is the first piece. They are ready to go. If they will conquer Ukraine, they will go to Poland and Eastern Europe, everywhere. And then where is your growth?
Sasha, if Germany and France actually had some moral compulsion about the issues that happened with Russia, things like this were going on. They annexed Crimea in breach of international agreements many years ago. Why didn't France and Germany and other countries around the EU react to it then? Why didn't they react to it when Donald Trump said, listen, it's not fair for America to have to pay to support NATO allies while you sit there and buy stuff off our enemy? You know, that
wasn't Trump, for Christ's sake, is he bookkeeper or what is he? What is his business to pay so much? What is he? He's just common criminal. Don't even say his name.
All right,
it's not
Sasha.
a good case.
All right, Sasha. No problems. These people in European Union, are the most moral people ever. According to you, apparently, they can't be criticized by anybody except for American Democrats. When they don't listen to them, that's what's.
We're going to go ahead and
if that keeps you happy, fine.
I'm going to go ahead and close out because I have to get to another meeting. But it's been a wonderful show, and we're going to come back tomorrow. We have a special guest, Guri Burmi, coming in to talk about his coast-to-coast ride across the country, returning from California. It's 6,200 miles on a motorbike. Amazing. It's going to be an exciting couple minutes with him to talk about his experience, why he did it. Thought it'd be a good holiday edition to have a little bit of break from the turbulence in politics and talking about just good human beings that are doing good things. And I'd like to share the story with the rest of the world. So finally, we're going to talk about the politics of tomorrow, the presidential election coming up in 2024, the Democratic Party. So I want to thank you all for being with us. And we'll talk also a little bit about my interpretation of the Second Amendment and some of the things that we don't talk about in terms of why it was performed. And there's 2 parts of the Second Amendment. One is the right to bear arms, but the other one is regulating a militia. So at the time it was adopted, there was no military in the United States. So that's something we could talk about for future shows. But from our family to yours, thank you all so much for being with us. We'll be back next week for another edition tomorrow for Roku and Pod TV's World Edition. Thank you all so much.
Take care, Steve.